Good evening, and thank you for coming to our presentation this evening. Here at Team Codecent, we are in charge of the Improving Student Monitoring application for the Douglas Honors College. This is the version 1.0. So our team here, I'm Andrew Dickerson, I'm the team lead. This is John Wright, he's our database architect. Kevin Jacobs is our software architect. Grant Strong, he's our QA manager. Our advisor is Dr. John Amdick. He's a director here, or a doctor, an assistant professor here in the computer science department. And our client is Christina Dennis, and who is not with us in attendance, but is the secretary of the Douglas Honors College here at CLU. The agenda for tonight is a project recap on our previous two presentations, all four iterations. The iteration 3, iteration 4, we talked about myself, a demonstration by Kevin Jacobs, testing by Brent, and afterthoughts, kind of all of us, and then a question and answer in conclusion. So now, all right, so just to quickly recap the problem we were faced with. Christina's current system used 3 access databases to store the student information. So there was a lot of redundant information across them. It was really difficult to navigate, retrieve student records, because you had to always be accessing all 3 at the same time. It was difficult to report, because you had to export all 3 and then connect what you needed. So our project, our application was developed in C# using the Agile methodology. So it uses a single SQL database managed with SQL Server 2008. So we basically converted those 3 access databases into one, just using them as a model for the tables in a single database. That way it can be accessed as one and pull everything at one time. So this simplifies the image reporting, increases the efficiency, and it opens it to future expansion with the use of a client-server model. These are the required features for our project. For the first iteration, we were tasked with creating the database as well as a prototype GUI for viewing any information that was stored in it. The second iteration, we added features to create students and edit current student objects, as well as commit the changes made there to the database. For the third iteration, we had backing up the database completely, as well as any files that have been attached to the students, and implement some form of reporting. And for the fourth iteration, we just had configuring and polishing up anything that was left. Here's sort of a more detailed list of our exact required features. So everything was completed except for generating reports, which was completely optional. But we just didn't have the time for it. We did implement the ability to export the entire database to an Excel workbook containing the sheets, each sheet containing a database table. So the entire thing is there. She can do with it what she wants. It's really simple. All the headers for the columns are there. It's just how it was when she had it before. So it's now Andrew will talk about it. So iteration 3 was our previous. It finished on February 28th. Started our new iteration 4, which lasted 4 days. I'll go over some of the requirements for iteration 3. Mostly it was backing up and restoring the 2 functionality as John described. So the main problems we were faced with were how often to back up, if this was to be done by the client or if this was to be done automatically, and the capacity issues associated with that if we were making full backups of the entire database, if we'd eventually run into space issues down the road. In addition, the ability to create reports. We weren't sure how complex we should get with this, if we should graph within our program, and we were worried that that might in itself be a big enough project to be another 40 groups. As well as limiting exporting just to Microsoft Excel, which kind of has dependency on software. We wanted to avoid that. What we ended up implementing is that the backups are full copies. They have limited, as Kevin will go into detail, they're very limited in size. And there's an automatic feature that the client can just forget about backing up and will automatically do it. To continue with this, the reports, we're using Microsoft Excel spreadsheet because that's what our client is used to using, but it's not reliant on that, and you can also export a CSV very quickly. And there's also some performance enhancements made in iteration 3. So Kevin will go a little bit more into depth for iteration 3.
So for the backup and restore, there's a little bit of added complexity because we not only have the SQL backup, but one of the features was being able to attach files to a student record, like a PDF of a letter from the dean or something like that. So we used the .NET zip library to basically take our SQL backup as well as the file storage backup into one file, so she doesn't have to worry about tracking down multiple backup files for different purposes. It's just a regular zip file that Windows 7 or any program can really open up and actually look through exactly what's in there. Also, one benefit to this is it all takes place in another thread. So while a backup is taking place, the program's completely usable. So you can still browse and modify things. Kind of just a recap of a couple steps of basically how the backup works. The backup history is also something I'll demonstrate. Basically, it shows a timestamp and any errors that occurred during the backup process. So at any point, you can click on one of those history entries, and if it's still where you originally saved it, you can restore it without having to actually manually track that down. And then similarly on the restore, basically we extract the SQL backup into a temporary folder so that we can restore that and then restore the files. But it's kind of a two-step process. And then Andrew will continue on iteration 4.
So iteration 4, our most recent iteration, the biggest requirement was just configuring and kind of future-proofing our application. So the biggest conceptual problem we had was how verbose the features to implement, how much configuration do we allow. We ended up just narrowing down to two of the most interesting features to the client, which was adding new years and adding new courses, so that you can continue adding new years of students as well as any new courses that are in there, or change out the courses that are in there. So a few more problems that we had. UI refinement was a necessary basic functionality like resize, maximize, minimize what wasn't present due to the styling decisions we had chosen, as well as adding additional courses. There's some issues with data binding that I'll address later. So how we actually implemented these things, maximize, reset, all the basic functionalities were implemented, kind of made everything uniform, made sure that whenever you maximize everything is positioned correctly, and there's now overlays that appear whenever you're doing things like backing out or restoring, so the user is given some kind of feedback as to their progress and what they're working on. And then configuring, we have the ability to hide inactive students once a student is no longer considered an active student or they're not here anymore. And being able to search, but these are just features specifically requested by the client. It's kind of like feature creeping later, but we allowed it because it was easy. So installation of the client's machine, this is Dr. Emmett Toy to highlight this. John and a few of us had some trouble installing them to the program on the client's machine. It wasn't a lot of trouble, but basically just that in the computer science field or computer development, software development field, you sometimes run into, you develop a program and then when you get it on the client's machine, it doesn't function as you expect. In this case, it was her access tables were using text types. We had anticipated they would all be float types. It was a quick fix, but it was still a bug we ran into. Also, the installation of Microsoft SQL server was very lengthy. It ended up taking 2 days to install, or 2 meetings to install the program. Update to iteration 4 is kind of like our 4.5, our final version. We plan to do it. It'll be installed on Wednesday. It just includes some additional changes that the client requested last minute. Some of these are highlighted here, but just slight UI modifications and a little bit better course adding implementation. So now Kevin will go over the demonstration.
So basically what you see here is very similar to what we demoed last presentation. Basically you have a list of students who are currently active in the program. We can view any kind of their information, assign new grades, etc. So basically that and some of the basic search functionality was what we had last presentation. And what we've done since then is, like Andrew mentioned, the filtering for active and inactive. So this checkbox, we can uncheck that, and we'll see students who were active during 2012 but are no longer in the program. And that's as simple as just right-clicking on a student and deactivating them. So additionally, the year filtering is also working, so you'll see the list. There will update. The new student from email, this is basically a sample of the email that the DHC receives from their online application form. So instead of having to retype that, we simplified the process so that she can just copy everything, paste it into this window, and create. And there's a new student record opened up, already filled out with all the information that was in that email. So I have to put a student record. So yeah, now we've added that student, just as quick as that. The backups, and This is the history that I was mentioning. Basically, these are test backups that we were doing earlier today. So if they're still, actually, I believe I deleted those. So we'll go ahead and do another backup just to show you what it looks like. So the user's prompted for a password for the SQL backup and the zip encryption. So that was the SQL backup, and what's going on in the other console window is the actual zip process. So you'll see the program itself is still usable, and the backup's finished and added to our system. So anything that's in here, we can click View Contents, and it will basically open up that file in the default zip reader. And if the file can't be found, it'll prompt you if you want to remove the history entry, or you can leave it there. As far as restoring, you can also, you can just select from the history. It'll again prompt you for the password. And you can select either part or the full backup to restore. And because this is overwriting the database as well as all student files, it locks out the UI for that entire duration, because some of the data you'd be seeing might not be accurate. So if she ever wants to install this program on another computer and doesn't have a history entry for that, you can just select backup from file and find that backup on a server or something like that. The reporting, as we mentioned, we kind of ran out of time to get that finished, but the export to Excel, basically it still leaves her in a better place than where she was, because all of the data for multiple years is within one file, rather than having to track down a different access table, or 3 different access tables for each year. You get one Excel file that's the entirety of the database, 3 workbooks, and you can easily filter by years, or things like that. And then the CSV is also there in case there's ever Excel complications or incompatibilities. The add courses, basically, for feature expandability, she'll be able to type in the details of a new course that the DHC starts, click add course, and that adds a column to the grades table so that they can track those grades in the future. The automated backups, basically every X amount of weeks, we can check for whether a backup needs to be done. And basically what happens is if you start the program and there was a backup scheduled sometime in the past that hasn't been done, it will prompt you if you want to do the backup right now or put it off longer. And one thing that she's actually already configured in the DHC is set this up to automatically back up to a remote server so that she doesn't have to think about that. And then lastly, adding future years to be able to filter by. It was requested that this was a manual feature, so it's as simple as just adding it right there, and that's just an XML setting. And then the last one I was going to show was expandability as far as pointing to a different server. It can be locally hosted or remote. You'll see right now I just switched to the database instance. And this is actually our test database with 16,000 or 1,600 student records. So it doesn't slow down the computer at all, and that's more than was requested by our client. So we feel like from a performance standpoint, we won't have any issues as far as growing the future. And now I'll turn it over to Brent.
All right, testing philosophies, our approach to testing the interface. Initially, we explored the possibility of using automated testing for that, but the added complexity kind of didn't appeal to us. So we just decided to go with manual testing, and that has worked out just fine thus far. For automated testing, we are using Visual Studio 2010, so we went with NUnit for unit testing. These automated tests are being conducted on our students and our database controller classes. And as Kevin mentioned, with performance testing, we use that larger than requested database to test the performance. It handles it just fine. For automated testing, we're using, as I mentioned, NUnit and integration testing. For the integration tests, this will pretty much consist of testing how our students interact with the database controller and the information that's being passed back and forth between the database. Positive and negative tests, this involves creating a student and setting all its values to null to set the student ID, which can't be null, and testing the getters and the setters for those fields, and making sure it's returning the correct values. We just completed our second acceptance test. This is the form that was filled out by myself. John and Kevin were also present at the time. This was followed pretty recently after installing the software to her machine. The results, overall it was a pass. She was very pleased with our progress and how we met the requirements. Tasks involved included previous iteration tasks, including just viewing students and creating students, as well as current iteration requirements like reporting and backing up. And this was to ensure those other functions were still functional and not broken. Some small issues came up, however. First one was the new student from email. From the information she pasted into that box, it didn't parse through correctly and populate the fields. So we have to go back and compare the data that we were using to test that function with the data she was using. And also the additional feature to search by student date entered into the CW or DHC. This is a minor fix, but it was required by her that it would be very beneficial. And then also the option to specify that a student is pending or their application is in progress, so that it doesn't actually put them in if they're not actually in the program yet, but their application is just pending. For development, hindsight, and our thoughts, we felt it was a good idea to take the agile development method approach for this project. A lot of new requirements have come up along the way, and we felt we've been able to handle this pretty well. Just for example, the email and the filtering options. We felt that this development method handled those correctly.
Oh, and another we probably should have tested the client data a little bit sooner, as it did uncover that minor issue with the incompatible data types. So, while in this situation it wasn't too big of a deal, like Andrew said, it shows that it could have been an issue in a different situation, and so it's something to keep in mind.
And then architecturally, better error handling plans would have been useful. And what I mean by that is like our data controller or database controller class. Some of the error handling is done there, and some of the error handling is done in the presenter. And it would have simplified things to figure out ahead of time exactly where we want that to take place. So you don't have to be checking one class or another to see where you're actually handling errors.
And then just, I'd say just team communication, having better communication, like having multiple forms between us of how to communicate with each other and having set Scrum meeting times earlier. So this concludes our presentation. Thank you for listening to it, and I'll open the floor now for question and answer.
So why did you guys use a zip file instead of like about back or just your own file?
Actually, I can show you real quick. What I was mentioning as far as the student files that are attached, basically we have a folder that contains their student IDs. So these are just test files that are attached. You can see the .back is in there, but there's two components to the database. So one would just be a folder, but to make it an actual file, zip was an obvious choice.
Okay. I have another backup related question. What happens if they try and manually restore this? Like they restore from a file and they try and load a file that isn't really backup. It's just a zip folder and
it looks for key files that are required. The back file isn't required if you're not recovering the database. If you're just replacing the student files, it will work fine. But it does look for like the backup history is required, so it'll recognize and acknowledge it.
Okay, nice.
Okay, maybe this is not a question for you guys, but why this was not implemented using PeopleSoft by actually CTS? Because CTS has PeopleSoft, which potentially has all this functionality.
Right. I'm sure that may be coming
First,
from.
maybe not the
Yeah, it's
English,
not.
but then you ask me what it is.
No, I mean, it came from another group that we had our project and it was kind of trashed by another PeopleSoft module, and so I came to this group. So I'm kind of glad that we didn't get a PeopleSoft solution to this. But
Have you ever used PeopleSoft?
Yeah.
What is the interface like?
it doesn't look like this.
They're terrible.
This is
a huge group.
It's fast, yeah.
that's the answer.
Wow.
What types of reports did your client initially think that you'd be able to generate from her?
From what she had described to us originally, she'd like to have it in Excel. She'd take different portions of the axis and copy and paste them into Excel, and then try to compare, like, I think initially it was just the amount of students that were graduating or who actually completed the program, just making a simple graph of that data. So it wasn't anything too extreme, but she did express an interest, or it would be cool to be able to see, like, unique trends, like people that had gotten an A in this class that ended up completing the course, and how many years it took them to complete the course, or things like that. And the ability to have all of her information that has ever been entered and be able to, then generate graphs from that as she saw fit was, an enticing feature. We kind of just took that as we would make the graphs, we'd make our own, use like an open source graphing thing within our actual interface, but that became too in-depth and kind of out of the scope of our project, I guess. And Microsoft Excel is a decent spreadsheet application anyway. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm hearing it was kind of vague and hadn't really well defined what the report she needed at the beginning.
Part of that was because there's a current lack of reporting, just because there's 3 access tables every year, so it's really limited as far as what she can report year to year. So it's something that she wanted to be able to do in the future. So while we didn't get all the way there, it's a step in the right direction.
So I noticed when you enter the year, you can enter any number. I guess you can enter, does it check the numbers and letters, just out of curiosity?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And are you able to delete a year if they enter?
Yep.
Okay. I didn't see that.
Not open anymore, but just there's
Okay,
where
I believe you.
Initially, we had it automatic to where if you created a new student and you had entered their years entering as like 2013, and there was no more students in 2013, and automatically create that year and have that populate. But it was actually requested. She wanted a feature where she could physically type in like 2013 and hit add.
I think Kevin mentioned that. I
Yeah,
don't
and he
know.
did manually.
Also, I noticed whose laptop is that? Because it definitely popped up that Windows isn't genuine.
we don't actually know who owns it.
All right.
Maybe